Hello.
We're going to give it a little. Curtis has taught me. We're going to give it a little beat so that it goes out into the universe. We want to say hello to our friends on X. We want to say hello to our friends on TikTok, on Facebook, because we're covering all the angles here and all of the different avenues because this is the Union Podcast. And we're so glad that you're with us today. And I'm so excited to be joined by a very special co host. It's a ladies only edition of our very special podcast, Rachel Canter, who's been on before, but it was on with Curtis. It's a little different flavor. But the ladies are taking over today on this beautiful Friday. It's morning where we are, coming to you live from Las Vegas, but it may be afternoon where you are. We're just glad you're joining us. And Rachel, glad to have you on this ride with us today. It's a wonderful day to be in education. A lot of exciting news that we're actually going to break some good news today. I think on this broadcast.
Uh, it's nice to have good news in education right now because we have a whole lot of bad news all the time, it feels like. But I'm happy to be here. I was on with Curtis maybe 2 weeks ago, and so I feel like I've done both of the co-hosts now, and eventually maybe the stars will align, and both of you will be here at the same time.
It's going to happen. It's going to happen. And I tell you, when we're all together, like in person, that's a magic. We're going to have to make that happen. I think sooner than later. But you're right. There is a lot going on in the world right now, and I want to get into the good stuff, but I think we got to stop and pause because there's a lot happening, and frankly, a lot happening for kids this week. And there's been just a tremendous tragedy where a young person, a young father, his life was taken in a very public way. And I don't want to get into the politics of that because there are so many strong feelings, I think, on both sides. And when you're in the world of politics, there's a lot of polarization. But I got to tell you, Rachel, and I want to get your take on this. The thing that concerns me, and always is kind of the center of our work at the National Parents Union, is how this is impacting children. And I spent some time with the Christian Science Monitor this week talking about that issue because my experience with my kids was, my son was coming out of basketball practice, and I have 5 boys. They're 12 to 17, and the digital world is coming at you fast all the time. And my youngest son, who is 12, was coming out of basketball practice and instantly gets hit with the algorithm, instantly gets hit with the video, super graphic video. I mean, we've all seen it. And I feel pretty confident in saying we've all seen it because it's absolutely impossible to avoid. And my baby was, called me in a panic saying, "Mom, is this real? Is it AI? Did this really happen? I can't believe I just saw that." And literally, like, I had to take him through this moment up until like 1 o'clock in the morning where he's like, I close my eyes and I can't stop seeing this happen. And I can't believe this happened. So politics aside, all of this aside, to me, what this comes back to is, this was a tough week for kids. It was also a tough week for teachers. I talked to my husband, who's a teacher. I talked to, a number of different teachers out in the wild. And, they've had to come up with a way to process this with kids because of the exposure to this, because unfortunately we have not yet been successful in passing KOSA, the Kids Online Safety Act. Social media is unregulated. And this is part of, unfortunately, growing up in a digital world. So I don't know, it's tough. Like, before we get into like what we want for kids, and there's NAEP scores this week, and I want to talk about your fantastic plan for like how we actually not just talk about and wallow in the problems, but do something about it. But I think before we get there, we got to acknowledge, like, these are some of the things our kids are grappling with right now that we've got to show up for them and figure out as the adults how we protect them.
And it's not lost on me that this happened on a college campus. It's yet another school shooting. And the idea that, the kids in that moment that were attending that event, instantly what had to have gone through their minds was, oh no, is this a mass shooting? And they were running. And the number of times we've seen that image now on our national media of kids in a panic, running, not knowing, am I going to be next? It's horrifying. The the idea that from, little babies in childcare centers all the way up until college, like this is something that our kids have to think about is, if I go to an event, a public event, even if I'm sitting in my classroom, is there going to be an act of gun violence that is going to change my life forever? And that also is not lost on me in this moment, where educational institutions should be safe. They should be safe for kids. They should be safe for faculty members, for parents, for educators, for visitors. And they're not in this country. And that's something that I think also that we have to think about in this moment too, is we have talked for, decades now about how to make schools safer, and they're not any safer. And yesterday was also the anniversary of 9/11. And, when that happened, I was actually in college when that happened. And I remember just the amount of conversation we had at that time about how to explain these acts of terrorism to children. And it struck me yesterday in the conversation about everything that happened in Utah, that we are in a really sad and scary place where Sesame Street has a litany of resources now for how to talk to children about violent acts, stretching all the way back to 9/11, because that's the world that we live in.
Yeah. And, unfortunately, every time these situations happen and come up, we'll have a moment of reflection. Sometimes we're lucky enough to get a moment of unity. It's not feeling like that right now. But there doesn't seem to be enough action to really step up. And I have to tell you, our work on the Kids Online Safety Act and trying to shepherd that through as being like the least that we can do. Like, there's a lot of conversations about banning cell phones from schools and all of that, and frankly, this week is a demonstration of how the conflict that parents feel all the time, because yes, we're concerned about the distraction of it. But, when you have schools, right, I got calls from parents in Georgia who had schools that were on lockdown this week because they were getting threats as a result of what happened to Charlie Kirk. And there's a brand new cell phone ban. And everybody's calling the school secretary, and the things we said that parents were concerned about, that there wasn't going to be a good information flow. Like, this is what's happening because these things don't happen in a vacuum, and the issues are intersectional. So, like, as we go on, and I want to get to the positive, because you know what? This morning there was a literacy resolution that was introduced. It was bipartisan. More Republicans than Democrats. Eight Republicans, 7 Democrats, 1 independent. It is possible for us to get things done. But before we can sit down with the babies and say, listen, we figured this out. Like, this literacy problem, it's a crisis, but it's a crisis we got an answer to. We just have to do what is required to get it done and implement the science of reading. Before we can get them concentrated on that, we got to make sure that we're not inflicting trauma on them so that they can open their minds. Like, that's where, Rachel, I don't know if you feel the tug and pull of like trying to get people to understand, like, there are issues that intersect and impede our ability to actually make progress on the things that we know are right for kids.
It is hard to focus on, the crisis that we have right now, the very real crisis we have right now in academic achievement in this country, when there are so many things in our very complicated world going on at any given moment for, the universe of adults, but also within families. And that can make it really difficult. And yet that's what we're called to do at the same time. We're called to make sure that, yes, in spite of this very complicated, sometimes horrific world that we live in, every day we got to show up and think about, how are we teaching kids how to read? How are we teaching kids how to do math? And how are we building better citizens to make a better world than the one that we all live in?
Well, you're setting this up perfectly, because, girl, you were on the hot seat this week. You were in the belly of the beast in DC on the day the NAEP results were released.
Oh, yeah.
So, not for nothing, like, literally, like, in the place where we've got to make people pay attention, really complex data, really, like, depressing data we were seeing, but also luckily showing up as kind of like a beacon of light, saying, hold on, like, there's actually things that we can do to make this better. So let's set the stage. It's the morning of NAEP. You wake up. Let's walk through your day, girl. Like, how did you react to the NAEP scores? Give us your assessment on what you thought the nation's report card was like for kids this year.
So I knew it was coming out, and Keri is referring to the fact that on Tuesday I launched the Reinventing America Schools, which is the project that Curtis and I are under at PPI, the new vision statement for how we are going to align our work going forward. And I knew the NAEP scores were coming out, so the first thing I did after I woke up is I went to the computer and I was like, well, what did they say? And then and it was terrible. It was even worse than the 4th and the 8th grade data in a lot of ways. And that's pretty depressing. We spend so much time looking at the 4th and the 8th grade data because that comes every 2 years, and we don't get the 12th grade data as often. But what this 12th grade data said was, kids at 12th grade are performing even worse than kids at 4th and the 8th grade did in this past NAEP cycle, and even worse than they have, in years and years and years. And at that level, when you're talking about seniors in high school, that was your last opportunity to get them ready to go to go on to their lives beyond high school. And we are really failing the challenge, is what that NAEP data said. And so that was really top of mind for me when I came to that briefing to talk about the launch of that report that morning, was that we are in a moment of crisis, and when we are with our educational outcomes for kids, and when we're also in a moment of so many different crises, it can be hard to keep the focus on something like, well, the kids can't read. Okay, well, the kids also, they go to school and they might have active violence on their campus. And then we have concerns about food insecurity, and we have all these things, and it can be hard to keep the focus. And yet, if we're not focused on that over a long period of time, then we end up in the situation that we're in, where we've got some of the lowest educational achievement outcomes, in this century, and we have the lowest satisfaction among parents and the public that we've seen this century. Parents know. I think this is the thing that sometimes policymakers forget. They think they may know what the NAEP data is, but they think parents don't know what it is, and they think parents aren't aware that these report cards come out. And maybe the average parent doesn't know that the 12th grade NAEP data came out on Tuesday, but the average parent 100% knows how they feel about the quality of education offered to their child and their neighborhood and their community. And they are saying very clearly in the polling, and you know this better than I do, they're very frustrated right now. They know that the schools have not been living up to their promises, and they want us to do better as an education community.
Yeah, it's wild from the constituency I represent, which are American families. It's as if people think we're dumb, like we can't see what's right in front of us. And that was the silver lining for me of the pandemic itself. We were concerned, we were a little bit iffy about the trajectory of public education and whether our kids were getting what they needed to be adequately prepared for college and career before the pandemic. And then we saw this play out in our living room. And I think sometimes people forget that, parents and families, we're fully formed adults with brains in our heads, and these are our children. We have a vested interest in their success. So we're not passive, participants in the lives of our children. We are deeply invested in what's happening, and we can understand things. If we're going to use gatekeeping language that excludes us, then, we're also pretty hip to that. But we have changed. The context has changed. Parents want to be a part of the conversation. We're very well informed, and we're showing up and asking questions. And so that's why I was very excited. It definitely inspired me and filled my cup on a morning where we were just hit between the eyes, oh my gosh, my mind was immediately going to these poor kids. This is data from last year. These are kids who are now probably trying to struggle through on the struggle bus, in community college, taking 2 years of remedial courses before they can take a college level course. Mom and dad are having to figure out how to pay for that because those classes cost, all of that. But to walk into this briefing and PPI saying hold on a second, this is something we're thinking deeply about. We don't have to stay stuck, because that's another thing about parents. Like, don't hand us a problem and say, like, this is the end of the world. Like, we want to get to action. We want to fix this for our kids.
Right. And also, we can't say to parents, you go figure it out on your own. That is not an acceptable answer either. And I think too many of our policy goals right now, especially with some of the private school choice conversation, is we'll give you some money, you go figure it out on your own. Well, what about the 90% of families with kids who are in public schools? Like, this is a problem for us to collectively solve. And I think that part of being a person who's been doing this work for a really long time is that I have to be an internal optimist, because if I wasn't, it might have been hard to keep going. Mm-hmm. But having come from the Mississippi context, where people really name any joke, Mississippi was the punchline, and to some extent, for many people, Mississippi is still the punchline. But you know what? We can't be the punchline on education anymore, because we did something people thought was impossible. We moved from the bottom of the country, and not just some kids, all kids in Mississippi made dramatic progress in the last 2 decades. I'm talking kids who were high achieving, low achieving, white kids, black kids, poor kids, non-poor kids. Everybody moved in that time period. We did not make that progress just because of the bubble, or kids right around the middle, or kids, high achieving kids. No, it was all kids. And so I think that is what fills me with a sense of optimism and hope, that yes, if we pull together around a coherent agenda and around some aligned values for what we want for our kids, the country can make progress. It's just going to take work, and it's going to take focus. And that is part of the thing. Like, we have to keep our eye on the ball, no matter who's in office, no matter what else is going on. We have to pull together and keep our eye on the ball around things like literacy and math, and around things like making sure parents have a voice, and making sure that we're connecting high school experiences to what comes beyond. Like, these things are critical things that we need to be able to say to parents and mean it. This is what we're promising to you. We are going to remake this education system so that it works for you and your child.
And I want to spend a little bit of time because I think it's really important that people understand that this is not like something that happens like flip it on a light switch. And what I took away from that briefing, that I want to make sure people really understand, and that's why I'm so excited that you were the woman leading this movement, because it's not like this was not something that you read about and now you're trying to do on the national. You lived this for 20 years in Mississippi. So when we talk about being the butt of that joke, like, you are from Mississippi, you decided, I'm going to go back to Mississippi. You went to Harvard, all these fancy, and you decide, I'm going to come home and I'm going to grind on this, and it's going to be hard. And I think I would love for you to kind of get into the making progress for kids under any and all conditions, because I think that's what we as an education space need to hear. Like, it doesn't matter who the electeds are. We've got to work with anybody and keep our eye on the North Star, which is kids. You had to go through a number of different speakers and contexts and conditions. So give us the story. Like, let us in a little bit about the 20 years of toil so that we can better understand that, like, we've got to set a vision and then grind on this probably over the next 20 years to make it happen.
I mean, I think people think that, oh, well, we're going to find the new fancy policy that no one's ever heard of before, and then we're going to go in and we're going to do it, and boom, 3 years later, everything's going to be fine. And that's just not how change happens. There are a variety of different things that we know that works, because we've seen them work in districts or at individual schools. And the question is, how do we build the will to do those things at scale? And how do we persist over a long period of time? Because one thing that can happen, even if you get a great policy passed, then once that excitement of getting the bill through goes away and the cameras turn off, people kind of go back to their own corners and they forget about how hard it is to implement something well, how much support it takes, how much you have to be committed to be in the long haul and be honest with yourself. Like, the bill that we passed got a lot of things right. It didn't get this right. Now we need to come back and fix it. And we need to be honest about that. And we need to keep moving forward. I mean, when I started in Mississippi, I was 26 years old. I moved back to Mississippi, moved to Jackson, where I had not grown up. I had grown up in a small town north of Jackson, and I didn't know anybody. And I just got laughed out of rooms on a regular basis, or just ignored, where people were like, this is ridiculous. You're not, they didn't even know what I meant when I said I was doing policy work. And there were several people who were really gracious with me with their time. And what it started to feel like were there were people who always believed in these things and they felt isolated. And it was a process of me going and finding those champions in the legislature, in the Department of Education, in the community spaces, and trying to like draw them together in some way, and like and build that network of, okay, I know that you deeply believe in this, and I'm going to do whatever it takes to help you be successful in doing this work that you're doing, because that's going to be beneficial for kids. So when I found a legislator that read the 20-page paper I handed to him, I was like, okay, I'm your new best friend. If you need research, if you need bill edits, if you just need me to stand there so you feel like you're not alone, like, this is what my job is right now. And over time, that started to snowball, and we started to get more people at the department. And when Keri Wright was hired in late 2013, and she started in 2014, then we had a leader at the department who was really focused on this idea of, now we're going to implement this vision. And that was really beneficial, and that put wind in our sails. And she had a lot of great people who no one has ever heard of, because they don't end up in the headlines, but they were critical people who were working at the department, who were saying, no, we're going to do this, and we're going to do it right, because this is what's best for kids. Mm-hmm. And the story to me is a story of, people who are from Mississippi believing in Mississippi and believing in our own children and believing that they could do better when no one else did. And just persisting, because it's not a sexy story to say, yeah, you're going to have to do this for a decade, right?
Let's not discount that piece. Like, because in Mississippi, like, there was kind of a self-defeating kind of attitude and context where people were like, well, we're Mississippi, like, we know. Like, you almost had to take people through an emotional process to be like, no, like, their own belief gap about their own kids. Like, Mississippi kids are capable. Like, we can get this done. We can make it happen.
I mean, and the country too has almost entirely given up on Mississippi in many, many ways. And what people forget when they joke about our state is that there are real people who live there, who have families, who care about their own community. And sometimes it's a situation of they don't know what the best thing to do is. Sometimes they don't have the resources, but it's not that there are not people who, people who just don't care. There's never just people who don't care in any community. And I think that the problem was that the people who had that sort of defeatist attitude were in power. And that gives the status quo staying power. When you have people in power who are like, the status quo is fine. Mm-hmm. It can't get any better anyway, so it's fine.
Really comfortable. Really
comfortable. They're not the ones who are being harmed by the status quo. And it took really pushing people who could see, who had the wisdom to see for, and to reach for something different and better, to push those people into places of power, or places where they could influence people of power, for us to be able to make that progress. Because like, no one person can do it alone. Certainly I'm not magical. I'm not, some sort of magical wizard with a magical wizard box where I was like pulling out all these tricks. No, it was just it was the real human to human work of, who can I find that will invest, that will stay the course, because they believe as I believe.
So you showed us that it's possible in Mississippi. Like, I want to do this so bad on the national level. So tell me how we're going to do this. How, like, walk me through the plan. Like I'm ready to go. So tell us where you're leading us. Cause I like an example like that it's possible even in a place like Mississippi gives me hope that maybe we could get this thing done and really get folks of goodwill to come together on the national level.
Yeah, so I think it starts with this idea of a new compact with parents around what public schools are promising them. As you've talked about a lot, I know, and as your polling shows, parents really feel like the system is broken. And they're not really sure, if I send my kid to public school, what does that mean for my family? Is my child going to get what I want them to get? And so I think we have to clearly say to parents, yeah, we're going to promise you a couple of things. We're going to promise you that if you send your kid to public school, they're going to be able to read by fourth grade. They're going to have basic numeracy by eighth grade. And by high school, those skills are going to be advanced enough that wherever they want to go, they're going to be able to not just go there, but persist through that pathway, whether that's college, whether that's a career tech program, a 2-year degree, micro-credentialing, whatever it is, they're going to have those sufficient skills to go there. And then we need to say, yeah, you're going to get a voice and what this looks like for your family and a choice within the public system. We know that people want choices. They've been asking for choices, and we've just sort of like turned our ears off. Because it's a real lack of imagination about what a public system could look like and could deliver. And then we need to say, yeah, if you want an early childhood education experience for your family, you're going to have access to some real quality options for that. And we're going to redesign high school so that there's a real connection between the high school experience and what comes after. We're not going to leave kids feeling anymore like, okay, I got this diploma and now what do I do with my life? It's so confusing where to go, how to go, other than going to college, which is a fairly clear pathway in America. Every kid in America knows what you have to do if you want to go to college. But if you want to do anything else, it is not at all obvious how to find your way into a high wage, high skilled profession that's not going to be a dead end in 5 years. And so I think that's the core promise that we have to make to families, but then we're going to have to change the system to make good on that promise. For us at PPI, that means we need to have a robust system of public school choice. And choice means a lot of different things in the public sector. It means charter schools, yes. It also means other diverse models within our traditional system. It could mean magnet schools, it could mean community schools, it could mean course choice in high school, it can be dual enrollment or open enrollment in a traditional district. It means all these different things. And we have had this very, small box thinking around what the system is. We have charter schools, we have traditional schools, and it looks exactly like it looked 40 years ago, when millennials and Gen X were in school. And it does not have to be that way. And in fact, parents don't want it to be that way. And if we're going to educate all kids to high levels, we need to be making a system that is flexible to their needs. So that is a real critical reinvention piece. I also think we need to double down on the idea of accountability. Nobody likes that word, but it's basic human psychology that we are more likely to do things if we know we're going to be held accountable for them. But accountability is more than just the punitive sense of oh no, there's going to be a consequence. It's also about how do we set goals and measure them? How do we make sure that so for kids, how do we know what they're learning and that we're measuring the right things when we're measuring what they're learning? We're doing it in a transparent way so everybody knows what we're trying, where we're striving, and how much progress we've made or not made. And then when we're identifying, okay, here's where we're not doing well, we're doing something about it. That's really what accountability is for me. It's the doing something about it, and not the just name and shame. It's okay, how are we solving this problem? Are we going into a school that's doing poorly and deciding, okay, we have a lack of leadership. Maybe we need to figure that out. Maybe we don't have the resources. Maybe we need to figure that out. Maybe we haven't designed the school day in a way that makes sense for the kids in this community. Maybe we need to figure that out. To me, that's what accountability means. And when we look at the private school choice programs that have been sort of exploding across the country, that's one of the most worrisome things about it to me, is that there's this real lack of accountability, both on the educational outcome side and sometimes on the money side of it, where we wouldn't even know if those kids are getting a better education because we're not going to test them. And we're not, or if we are going to test them, those tests aren't comparable in any way.
That's what's got me deeply, deeply concerned right now, because, parents and families have been ignored for so long. We know 86% of American families support public school choice. But that that has been the same for the last 10, 15 years. And we've been banging our heads to the point now where we are so desperate and feel like we have been so ignored, and we can see what's in front of us. We're so desperate for change to try to free our kids from what seems like a failing system or a failing option, something that's just not what this antiquated factory style model of public education that just doesn't work for every kid in 2025. When you go from being unheard for so long, it gives opportunity for people to come in with this bag of magic beans saying, oh, you don't like that, not knowing that, many of us are not given choices that are worth choosing, if we're given choices at all. Some of the choices are only available to people who already have means. And frankly, what we know is that what parents desperately want are educational options that provide those meaningful, measurable results. Because parents aren't here just to the end and here to try to get a piece of paper at the end of a stage. Like, we're here because we want our kids to be prepared for the jobs, for the economy of the future. We want them to have better lives. We want them to have economic mobility and have an easier time of it than we did. And if we're like rolling the dice and saying, well, I guess we'll give this a shot, there are so many of the folks that I represent that don't have that safety net of a trust fund or mom or dad to come in and sweep in and say, well, if we got it wrong and you use this voucher or exercise this choice and you didn't learn to read and you didn't learn any skills, or you're unprepared to even take a college level course, what's going to happen? Like, what are we going to say? And are we just like kicking the can down the road? We're going to have to clean up a giant mess based on an untested, unevidenced experiment that we're in right now. And folks like mine, where the consequences are poverty, are incarceration and death, and somebody, like, these are the real consequences that kids are going to face if we're not giving them choices worth choosing. And we've got to say that.
Right. And as I said on Tuesday, I look at it as a new way to abandon parents under the guise of freedom, because now we feel no responsibility for you. And now we feel no responsibility for the success of your family because we've made it your problem. Here's some money, go figure it out on your own. We're not going to regulate the market for you. We're not going to make more choices available to you. We're going to let somebody else worry about that and figure it out. And you're right. For some families, that's going to work great, because they're going to be able to get their child into that ritzy, fancy private school. And, they may already have been able to afford it. Now they can afford that and a new car. But, for many of our families, that is just not going to be the reality for them.
And somebody's going to have to explain to me why we're okay with whipping out checks and telling people to figure it out on their own when it comes to education. But when it comes to SNAP benefits, like, we want to crack down on what you can do and micromanage that. Like I don't like. Again, that's a conversation for another day. But I'm trying to understand what we trust parents with, what we don't trust parents with. And a lot of the time, like, we just got to get real and call out these things to say, like, hold on a second, what are we really doing here, and who's really
if you believe in accountability for some people, why don't you believe in accountability for all people? It seems like a very basic, plank of fairness that we would expect the same of everybody. If we're gonna expect it of some schools, we should expect it of all schools. So that's number two. Then I think that one of the things that really strikes me coming out of the pandemic is that it wasn't just parents who felt really kind of betrayed by how everything went down. I think a lot of teachers felt somewhat like adrift during the pandemic. They were often told, okay, there's going to be no school, and now we're going to do it over Zoom, but your students may or may not have a laptop. We don't really know. And we're not really going to give you any training or any curriculum that is, you can do over a computer screen. Just go figure it out. And what we saw were a lot of teachers really, really struggled in that time period. We saw teacher burnout spike. We saw teacher vacancies. After people right during the pandemic didn't leave their jobs because it was so economically uncertain. But after sort of that first initial wave of the pandemic, we saw vacancy spike, because teachers were like, I don't know if this is what I want to be doing with my life right now. Or if they could retire, they retired, right? And I think we've been talking about how to make the teaching profession more sustainable, more financially viable for educators, more attractive as a profession for 20 years. And with the exception of some like bright spots around the country, we really have not done big changes at scale around compensation, working conditions, training, and support. How are we, because my child and your child needs a teacher to show up every single day ready to go, knowing what it is that she's going to do that day and knowing how she's going to get it done and having that confidence in her expertise to be able to do that. And I think oftentimes we just sort of push teachers out into the world and say, okay, good luck. And, that's what it really felt like when I started teaching 20 years ago. And I think a lot of brand new teachers in 2025, that's still their experience. And that should not be the case.
I'm married to a second-year teacher, and boy, even in this second year, he's like, oh my, the amount of stress he puts himself under because he wants to do right and be successful for these kids so that they find success. And he is just kind of left to figure it out on his own. And that's what we're bringing people into.
Right.
Well, this is a brilliant report. It is a brilliant start. Where can people find it? I want to encourage everybody. I know there's a lot of information out here. Like, this is something that's actionable and real. It's a call to action. It's a call to unite and to get on board and a kind of a unifying agenda, which I'm excited about. So where can people dig into this and find it?
If you go to progressivepolicy.org, which is PPI's website, you'll see it right now, right on the splash page. But you can also click on the Reinventing America's Schools, little button, and you'll see it on that page. You can also look for my name under staff or Curtis Valentine's name under staff, and it will connect you to the Reinventing America's Schools project, where you'll see also the Union podcast playlist up, on the page. I made sure we got that added so that people could go back. Like, if they've just discovered the podcast this week or last week, they can go back and watch all the previous episodes of the good conversations you and Curtis have been having.
And I want to encourage, if your parents and families who listen to this podcast, we hear from you all the time. This is not one of those wonky reports where you're like, oh God, Keri, I don't even know what half these things mean. Like, this is really accessible. It's for us, and it's important because we've got to be a part of this conversation. And frankly, I'm excited to see us included on the front end of this and with intentionality. And so this is a great place to start. So we got to stop it here. We actually went over time. That's all right. Two ladies chatting on a Friday morning for some, afternoon for others. Like, I think they'll forgive us, but we're so glad to have all of you with us, whether you're on X or Facebook or TikTok, wherever you're finding us. Rachel, so just grateful for your leadership and grateful for the conversation and excited to see where this goes, and call on us if we can be of help.
Yeah, I'm super excited to work with y'all, Keri.
All right. Thanks for being with us this week. We'll be back. We're going to drag Curtis back onto this podcast next week, so you're not going to want to miss it. Life is coming at you fast these days. We're going to do our best to keep you well informed. If you're a parent, if you're a teacher, if you're a policy wonk who wants to understand us a little bit better, this is the place where that conversation is happening. So thanks for being with us.